Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going into a really quite disturbing case. Beverley Allitt.
Yes. It's one that sticks with you. She committed these awful attacks on infants back in 1991 between February and April.
Right. At Grantham and Kesteven Hospital in Lincolnshire, she was a state-enrolled nurse.
That's right. And the outcome, well, she was convicted of murdering 4 babies. 4. And then attempted murder on 3 others, plus causing grievous bodily harm, really serious harm, to 6 more.
It's staggering. And the way she did it, shilling doesn't quite cover it. We know large doses of insulin were involved, right? For at least a couple of the kids.
Yes, insulin was confirmed, and also an air bubble in another victim. But initially, figuring out exactly how all the attacks happened was, well, it was a real challenge for the investigators.
It could have been terrifying at the time, the uncertainty.
Absolutely, someone trusted, using their medical position to inflict harm in these hidden, insidious ways.
So, May 1993, she gets 13 life sentences. The judge was very clear, wasn't he? Called her a serious danger.
He did, and basically said she was unlikely ever to be safe for release. She's currently held at Rampton Secure Hospital in Nottinghamshire.
Okay. And this is, I think, a key point for listeners, and maybe quite unsettling.
Yeah, the minimum time she had to serve, the minimum tariff, that actually expired back in November 2021.
Meaning she became eligible for parole then. We'll definitely circle back to that.
For sure.
But first, maybe let's look at her background. Where did she come from?
Okay. Beverley Allitt, born October 4th, 1968. She grew up near Grantham in a village called Corby Glen.
And her family?
Fairly ordinary, it seems. 2 sisters, a brother. Her dad worked in an off-license. Her mom cleaned at a school.
So no obvious red flags there, not that you'd always see them.
Exactly, which often makes these cases even harder to comprehend, you know?
She went to a secondary modern school, Charles Reed, after not passing the exam for the local girls' grammar school.
Right. And interestingly, even as a teenager, she apparently did quite a bit of babysitting, volunteered for it.
Then left school at 16, went straight into a nursing course at Grantham College.
Yeah, that desire to go into nursing, into a caring role, when you look at what happened later, it's a really stark, disturbing contrast, isn't it?
It really is. Makes you wonder.
Definitely.
Okay, so the crimes themselves, you said February to April 91. So just a 59-day period?
Yeah, incredibly concentrated. Just under 2 months.
And what was the trigger? What made people finally realize something was seriously wrong?
It seems the death of one baby, Becky Phillips, was a major turning point. That, combined with staff noticing just a really unusual, alarming number of cardiac arrests happening on the children's ward.
Right, that kind of spike would stand out, I imagine.
Absolutely. In a medical setting, patterns like that, or deviations from the norm, they raise immediate red flags. It triggers an investigation.
And the investigation found. Well, the key thing was Allitt herself, wasn't it?
Precisely. They established that she was the only nurse who was on duty for every single one of these attacks.
Wow. Every single one.
Every one. And crucially, she also had access to the drugs, like the insulin, that were suspected or known to be used.
That combination, her presence and her access.
Yeah.
Pretty damning.
It formed the core of the case against her, a very clear, very worrying link.
So the trial, the charges were huge. 4 counts of murder, 11 of attempted murder, and another 11 of causing grievous bodily harm.
A massive list. And her plea.
Not guilty to everything.
Denying it all, even with that kind of evidence stacking up.
But the jury, they reached a verdict relatively quickly, didn't they?
Yeah.
May 28th, 1993, guilty on all charges.
Which led to those 13 concurrent life sentences we mentioned.
And then you said Rampton Secure Hospital. But wasn't there something about what she said before the trial?
Yeah. Reports suggest she told friends something like, "I'll never go to prison," almost defiant, or perhaps unable to face reality.
Which makes her reaction after sentencing interesting. She was initially sent to prison, but transferred pretty quickly.
That's right. Apparently, she refused all food and drink, just shut down. After only about a week, she was moved to Rampton.
Right. And what about her mental state? Because that's often a question in these cases.
Oh, yes. And there were expert opinions. A forensic psychiatrist, Jeremy Coyd, and a criminologist, Elizabeth Yardley, both looked into it.
And their conclusion?
They concluded she wasn't sort of mentally ill in a way that excused her actions or meant she shouldn't be in prison. Their view was that she was responsible and belonged in the prison system, essentially.
Okay. But then there's this reported confession This adds another really difficult layer.
It does. Apparently, sometime later, while she was trying to argue to stay at Rampton rather than be moved potentially to a prison, she admitted to everything. All 13 crimes.
She admitted it all.
That's the report. But here's the really troubling part, according to the sources. The victims' families allegedly were never officially told about this full confession.
Seriously? They weren't informed?
Apparently not. Which, if true, is just.
Well, it raises huge questions about transparency, doesn't it? For families dealing with that kind of trauma, not knowing something so significant.
That's awful. Just adding insult to injury.
You'd think so, yeah.
Okay, let's shift to the legal side of the sentencing again, the minimum term.
Right. So in 2007, there was a high court decision. Mr. Justice Stanley Burton confirmed her minimum term was the original 30 years.
30 years. Because there was some confusion about that. Some thought it was longer.
Yeah, it seems some reports, maybe even some families, mistakenly believed it was 40 years. So this ruling clarified it was 30.
Which, again, underlines how complex and maybe confusing these legal processes can be for people caught up in the middle of it all.
Absolutely, especially when dealing with such intense grief and trauma.
And that 30-year mark, as we said, was hit in November 2021.
Making her eligible to apply for parole from that date.
Which must have been, and must continue to be, incredibly difficult for the families involved. Oh, undoubtedly. The thought of the person who caused such devastation potentially being released, it's a terrifying prospect for them, and frankly for the wider public, too. It forces these really hard questions about justice, punishment, and, rehabilitation, if that's even possible here.
And one of the biggest questions hanging over this whole case is why? The motive. Has that ever become clear?
No, not really. That remains one of the most perplexing aspects. Allitt herself hasn't provided a clear reason for what she did.
So it's mainly theories.
Exactly. And one prominent theory that's often discussed in relation to this case is factitious disorder, which used to be more commonly known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
Okay, can you explain that a bit?
Sure. So Munchausen by proxy, or factitious disorder imposed on another, is a mental health condition where a caregiver, often a parent or someone like a nurse, secretly makes someone in their care sick or pretends they're sick.
They induce illness or fake it? Why?
The driver is usually the caregiver's own need for attention and sympathy. They get seen as this devoted, caring person struggling with a sick child or patient. It puts them at the center of attention.
Wow. So the idea is Allitt might have been harming these babies to draw attention to herself.
That's the theory. It's a pattern seen in some other similar cases, but we have to stress it is a theory. Without a direct explanation from Allitt, it's an attempt to understand utterly incomprehensible actions based on known psychological conditions. We can't say for sure it was the motive.
It's a chilling possibility, though, the idea that seeking attention could lead to this.
Right.
But yeah, as you say, it's speculation ultimately.
And that uncertainty itself is deeply disturbing, isn't it? Not having a clear why makes the cruelty feel even more senseless.
Absolutely. So bringing things right up to date, there were developments quite recently, weren't there? Late 2023.
Yes. In October 2023, she had a mental health tribunal hearing.
What was that for?
It was assessing whether she could potentially be transferred from Rampton, the secure hospital, to a mainstream prison.
And what would that have meant?
Well, crucially, if she had been transferred, reports suggested she could have then become eligible for a parole hearing after just 6 months in the mainstream prison system.
6 months? So potentially much sooner than people might have expected.
Exactly. And you can imagine this caused a lot of renewed anxiety and media focus. The families were understandably very concerned about this possibility.
But what was the outcome? Did the transfer happen?
No, it didn't. In December 2023, the decision came back, reportedly denying the transfer request.
Okay. So she stays at Rampton.
For now, yes. She remains at Rampton Secure Hospital. And the next assessment, the next time this is scheduled to be looked at, isn't until 2026.
So a temporary reprieve for the families, perhaps?
You could see it that way, some short-term reassurance, at least. But of course, the underlying issue, her eventual parole eligibility, that hasn't gone away. It's just pushed further down the road.
Right. So just to kind of wrap up our deep dive today, we've covered the truly horrific crimes Beverley Allitt committed back in '91.
Yeah, the investigation, the trial, those 13 life sentences.
We've looked at her time in Rampton, the questions around her mental state, that reported confession the families apparently didn't hear about.
And the ongoing uncertainty about her actual motives, with theories like factitious disorder being suggested.
And finally, these recent developments about her parole eligibility, which started in 2021, and the recent tribunal decision keeping her at Rampton, for now, until at least 2026.
It's just such a chilling case, a reminder really of how vulnerable patients are, especially children, and the absolute devastation that can occur when trust in a caregiver is so profoundly betrayed. The scale of it here is just deeply disturbing.
It truly is. And maybe the final thought to leave you, the listener, with is this. How do we actually navigate these complexities? Justice, punishment, the possibility, however remote, of release after such extreme acts, especially when you factor in the lingering questions about why she did it and the impact on families who felt kept in the dark about her confession. It's a case that forces us to confront some really difficult, really important questions about how our system handles such profound betrayals.